Welcome to Halo Innovation's assembly guide for the HC-4800 plasma table. We're going to start off by building the base of the table. Please unpack and lay out the parts shown for this step. Before we begin assembly, let's confirm the location of specific parts. These legs are both part number 1. These other two legs are the front right and back left legs of the table. The leg with 4 bolts pre-installed in mirrored positions is the front one. When laying them out, be sure that the sides of the legs that have 3 bolts already pre-installed at the top of them are facing each other. Take both the back, left, and right legs along with one of the part number 3 square tubes. Remove the pre-installed bolts on the tube. Line up the holes on the tube to the bottommost holes on the lower half of the leg, with the larger holes facing down. Slide the bolt sleeve into the larger hole that's facing down, and feed the bolt through the hole on the opposite side, securing it finger tight with the nut. Do the same for both legs. Next, take the number 2 square tube and install it at the top of the leg, following the same steps that we just did to connect it to both of these legs. All of these steps will be repeated for the front legs of the table as well. When attaching the tubes on the sides of the frame, stand up the back 2 legs and take the number 3 square tubes as well, and install them on both sides using the open bolt hole above the tubes you already installed. Use just one bolt for now to allow for movement of the tube. Connect these 2 side tubes to both of the front legs, making sure not to forget to install the remaining bolts that we left out earlier on the back 2 legs. Take the remaining square tubes and install them on both sides of the table in the topmost bolt holes. Remember to tighten all of the bolts on all of the legs. Next, we'll be installing the wheels. Remove the hardware that's already pre-installed on them, and use it to attach the wheels to the bottom of each of the legs. Next, we'll be attaching the Y-axis gantry rails. Ensure the number 8 and 9 Y-axis gantry rails are oriented with the side that has more pinion gear teeth facing the front of the table. Take the 4 connecting rods and remove the bolts from each end. Install 2 of these at the front of the table running left and right, and the other 2 at the back of the table also running left and right. Next, we'll install the gantry rails. To do this, we'll need to lower the front and back upper square tubes and remove the 3 pre-installed bolts in these locations. If installing the gantry rails alone, then it may be helpful to only lower one of the tubes, giving you a bolt to hook one end of the gantry rail onto. When installing the gantry rail, be sure to line up the connecting rods with the circular indents on the gantry rail. Use the number 10 bolts to secure each end of the gantry rails to the legs of the table, only finger tight. Next, reattach the upper square tube and bolt it to the leg once again. Next, use the number 11 bolts to fasten the gantry rail to the connecting rods. After you do that, you can tighten the rest of the bolts as well. Once everything is secure, we'll repeat all of these steps on the other side of the table for the other gantry rail. Once again, make sure that you tighten the connecting rod bolts before you do the rest of them. We'll now be assembling the X-axis gantry. Gather the parts that you see on screen and lay them out in a similar fashion. You'll know the difference between parts 12 and 13 by looking at the black electrical box on them. Part number 12 has 4 electrical connections and belongs to the side of the gantry with 2 long wires. We'll start by attaching the THC assembly to the gantry carriage, which is located on the X-axis gantry assembly. The bolts needed for this step are pre-installed on the gantry carriage. Install the number 13 X-axis end assembly on the corresponding side of the gantry using the bolts pre-installed on part number 13. These will only be finger tight for now. Be sure that the black box on part number 13 faces the same direction as the THC assembly. We'll be repeating these same steps for part number 12 as well. We'll now be installing the X-axis gantry from the back of the plasma table frame. Remove the black plates from the back of the Y-axis gantry rails using the 2.5mm Allen key. Pick up the X-axis gantry and slide the ends of it over the guide rods of the Y-axis gantry rails, ensuring that the torch mount faces the front of the table. Once in place, tighten the bolts on the X-axis gantry with the 5mm Allen key. And then reinstall the black plates on the ends of the Y-axis gantry rails. Next, take the number 14 and 15 Y-axis limit brackets. Remove the bolts connecting the Y-axis gantry rail to the connecting rods on the right-hand side of the table. We'll be using these bolts to install the Y-axis limit brackets in these locations. Ensure that the bottom protruding section of both the Y-axis limit brackets face toward the middle of the plasma table. Next, we're building the water table. Collect the parts you see listed on screen and place them in a convenient location. Start by removing the drain plug from both halves of the water table. Take the sealant and spread it out across one of the sealing plates, making sure to get it specifically around the bolt holes. Proceed to place the sealing plate on the inside of one half of the water table, with the sealant pressed up against the inside of the water table. Make sure to line up the bolt holes on both of these. Put more sealant on the outside of the water table that we just placed the sealing plate into. Take the number 34 bolts and use them to place the silicone seal on the face of the water table with sealant on it, inserting a bolt into the bolt holes periodically in order to hold the silicone seal in place. Repeat all of the previous steps for the other half of the water table. Join the two halves of the water table together and insert the bolts, connecting the two halves and tightening the bolts afterwards. Stand the water table up on one of its sides and take this moment to clean some of the excess sealant off before it dries. With the help of another person, place the water table into the plasma table with the seam of the water table on the x-axis. Reinstall the drain plugs and use a little bit of sealant to ensure there are no leaks. Next, take the water tray slats and install them. The ends will not line up for the slots for them, so you'll need to slightly bend them in order for them to fit in properly. This is intended though, so don't worry. Next, we'll be installing the operator station and the control box. Identify the parts shown on screen and place them in your working area. Remove the pre-installed bolts on the back of the control box and install it on the front right leg of the table. Next, remove the bolts that are pre-installed on the leg of the table just above where the control box is installed, and use these bolts to install the control panel mount arm. Using the bolts pre-installed on the back of the operator station, install it onto the control panel mount arm. Gather the number 35, 36, 37, and 38 cables. We'll be connecting these cables to their respective ports. All of these cables only have one port that they can slot into, so it's impossible to connect them to an incorrect port. Taking the number 38 power cable, connect it to the control box using the bottom left black colored port. Next, connect the control panel cable to the top right black colored port on the control box and the port on the back of the operator station. Connect the Y-axis gantry cable to the bottom right green colored port on the control box and the bottom right green port on the gantry assembly. The last port on the control box is for the plasma cutter. Connect the gantry wiring on the right hand side of the table to the Y-axis gantry motor. If you need to reposition the THC manually, be sure to unplug the gantry cable from the control box first. Insert the THC power cable into the top port of the gantry assembly, and insert the other end into the port on top of the THC assembly. If you had to unplug the gantry cable, don't forget to plug it back in. Connect the left-hand side gantry wiring to the Y-axis gantry motor. Next, we'll be installing the torch and squaring it to the table. We'll next be installing the torch to the torch mount. Unplug the cables on the right-hand side of the gantry. Using the 4mm Allen key, remove the bolts that are holding down the drag chain. Once the drag chain is unbolted, we'll lay it out so that it sits straight. Using 2 flathead screwdrivers, remove the individual drag chain clips by applying forward pressure on the back of the clip and upward pressure on the front of the clip. Once all of the clips are removed, we can place the torch into the mount and lay the torch cable in the drag chain. Once we've done that, we can reinstall the drag chain clips. If you're going to be removing your torch from the table frequently, then you can save a lot of time by using these clips that we've designed to plug into the side of the drag chain. Check out our website for more information. Once all of the clips are back in the drag chain, place the drag chain in the original position and fasten it down once again. Once that's done, ensure the torch cable has enough slack so that there's no tension when moving from one side to the other. Once doing that, we can use a zip tie to hold the torch cable in place so that it doesn't move. We'll now be installing the torch into the mount. This torch mount is ideal for a hand torch and can be installed as you see here. If you're using a machine torch, then in order to properly mount it, you'll need to raise the clamp higher up so that it can be clamped onto the stick of the torch rather than the head of it. This can be achieved using the torch mount extension arm that we're using here. It's available on our website, either in a machine torch package or purchased separately. In this step, we'll be adjusting the THC and torch height in order to give us the widest range of movement on the Z-axis. First, loosen the torch in the mount slightly, and then lower the THC as far down on the Z-axis as possible. We need to position the torch in the mount so that the copper tip of the torch sits about 0.25 inches below the top of the water tray slats. Once you have the tip in the correct position, tighten the clamp on the torch again. Once you have the torch securely in the torch mount, we'll be roughly squaring the torch to the water table. Place some material down on the plasma table and lower the torch down with the THC until the tip is slightly in contact with the material. If you're using a hand torch, then unfortunately the only way to square the torch to the water table is to do this and eyeball how level the torch looks and how flat the tip of the torch looks to the material. If using a machine torch, then you can use a square with the torch and material in order to ensure that it's perfectly square to the table. Once the torch is square, ensure that all 5 bolts clamping the torch down are secure. Now that your plasma table is fully built, check out this video getting ready for your first cut. Thanks for watching.